Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I would like to explain. I've had a few people asking me, is South Africa really in a position to stop regime change in Zimbabwe? The answer to that one is actually yes. It is important to understand that the opportunity for South Africa to do that is because of our own failed system. We have got elections coming up sometime in August. The date will be announced very soon. And it is clear that ZANU-PF is rigging these elections. And we have failed in the country to address that problem. We cannot stop ZANU-PF going ahead with these elections. It is too late now to implement any meaningful reforms. And so ZANU-PF is going ahead with elections. We cannot also stop the opposition participating in these flawed elections. The reason why they are participating in it is because they know ZANU-PF is giving away a few gravy train seats as a bribe. Yes, after the election, they will complain that the elections were rigged, but that is to be ignored because they participated knowing the elections are being rigged. And this brings in the election observers then. In 2008, all the election observers, including SADC and the AU, condemned the 2008 elections as not being free, fair, and democratic. And that is what forced ZANU-PF to sign the 2008 Global Political Agreement and accepting the GNU. Since the 2008 with the 2013 elections, SADC flip-flopped again. Although at the beginning of the 2013 elections, just months before the 2013 elections, SADC itself actually called a special summit in Maputo, Mozambique, where they advised Morgan Tsvangirai not to participate in those elections without reforms. Because, as they said, if you participate, you lose. The elections are done. Morgan Tsvangirai and company did not listen, and they participated. And of course, ZANU-PF rigged those elections. But the real big surprise is SADC leaders themselves flip-flopped. And they turned around and endorsed those elections, endorsed ZANU-PF as the winner, and gave ZANU-PF legitimacy. This is where we've got the problem. These elections are a repeat of 2008, 2013, 2018, and nothing has changed at all. But if SADC was to turn around and say, no, these elections are not free, fair, and credible, ZANU-PF will lose their legitimacy. And that would be probably the best course result for the people of Zimbabwe in this circumstance. But with South Africa now saying it is not going to support regime change in Zimbabwe, that clearly means they're preempting that result. What they are saying is the Americans, the British, should have lifted the sanctions after 2017 military coup that removed Mugabe. And therefore, to retain the sanctions up to now is, according to the ANC, an attempt by the West to achieve regime change in Zimbabwe. And therefore, then, since the South Africans, and in this case SADC, are in a position to let ZANU-PF get off the hook with the rigged elections, that is exactly what they're going to do, so that there's no regime change. That is where our problem is. I would like to re-emphasize again the point that the right of the people to free, fair, and credible election is not a privilege that can be denied to some and granted to others. ZANU-PF is already denying about 3 million Zimbabweans in the diaspora the vote, on the basis that the party will be at a disadvantage. It will not be able to travel to campaign for the diaspora vote because it's under sanctions. What that has got to do with the people in the diaspora? Why should they be denied their fundamental right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country just because the West has imposed sanctions on ZANU-PF leaders? But even if we accept the argument that ZANU-PF leaders will be at a disadvantage, what is the excuse for denying those Zimbabweans in the diaspora who are in the SADC region and beyond, which have not imposed any sanctions on Zimbabwe? So ZANU-PF, the opposition, everyone is free to travel freely to those countries to campaign. The truth is, most of the Zimbabweans in the diaspora are there as economic refugees and or political refugees. And they blame ZANU-PF for their plight. And clearly, ZANU-PF knows that those people are not likely to vote for ZANU-PF. And therefore, then denying those people the right to vote is clearly makes sense to ZANU-PF. So ZANU-PF here is cherry picking who are the people who are going to be allowed to vote in these 2023 elections. That is totally unacceptable. How can you have free, fair, and credible elections when one of the contestants is able to cherry pick on who the voters are? And in this particular case, the 3 million constitute 37% of the potential voters. And let's not forget here that Mnangagwa won the 2018 elections with 2.4 million votes. So this is a very significant number. And already these elections could be considered not free, fair, and credible because you cannot cherry pick the electorate. But what South Africa is doing here is taking it one step further and saying even those people in Zimbabwe, it is not going to recognize their right to have free, fair, and credible elections because there are sanctions. Because the West have maintained sanctions on Zimbabwe. They are not going to allow the regime change in Zimbabwe as long as the sanctions are there. That is not acceptable. That is illegal. That is unreasonable. And that is totally unjustified. It is an outrage. If South Africa does not change its position on this matter, To be quite honest, these elections, we just as well save ourselves the time and the money and cancel them altogether. Because whatever happens, South Africa is not going to allow regime change. And therefore, then the result is already a ZANU-PF win. So what is the point in participating in an election process whose result is already declared long before the first ballot is cast? And I think for South Africa to come up with this position, and it's supposed to be one of the democratic nations in SADC, seriously undermines democracy in the region. And every thinking Zimbabwean, SADC member, ordinaries, South Africans, Botswanas, and Mozambicans, and so forth, should seriously look into this matter. This is a serious matter that affects the whole region. We are not going to have democracy in SADC as long as we have got bullies like South Africa who think they can bulldoze and bamboozle everybody into submission and decide who is going to rule the country. It is not for South Africa to decide who is going to rule Zimbabwe. It should be the people of Zimbabwe through free, fair, and credible elections. SADC's position in terms of observing the elections should be judging those election processes purely on the basis of whether or not they are free, fair, and credible. To bring in this issue of sanctions is quite honestly mischievous. They haven't proven that the sanctions are in any way going to stop the people's democratic will being expressed. And to do so unilaterally is totally unacceptable. Thank you.